This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation, brought to you by the IVT Network. As an industry, we are always striving to create the safest, most effective drugs and devices with the patient in mind. Providing a more personalized medicine and drug delivery system is beginning to be a bigger part of what we do each day. Through the use of new technologies and with risk-based systems in mind, we can more accurately tailor products to provide the best response, highest integrity, and lowest risk. And AI is only part of that effort. Our guest today has a unique perspective on the future of technology and finding the secret to individualized medicine with one part AI and one part 3D printing. Welcome to our guest, Justin Bechtel. Justin, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know with COVID this past year, everything's gotten busier, harder communication. So I appreciate you reaching out and even including myself and obviously PharmAllies as a whole in the show.
Yes, of course. No, and this has been a while in the making because we've had several discussions about not only this topic, but many others. And as you said, it is busy, but we love the busy, right?
Absolutely. Busy is not a bad thing. Exactly.
Exactly. So Justin, we've had a few conversations on this, as I mentioned, and you do have a very interesting take on the potential for AI technology and paired with 3D printing, actually. But before we dive in on that, can you help set the current stage? What does the current AI environment look like in terms of abilities and advancements, and how is this impacting the pharmaceutical and medical device industries today?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think everyone listening or watching has probably seen the Jeopardy show where AI faces a couple of their superstars and blows them out of the water. So that's something that probably everyone has a common ground on. They've seen that, and that was amazing in itself. But I think that's the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. When we're talking pharma, when we're talking medical devices, biotechnology, the opportunities are endless. The obvious one is in research and development, artificial intelligence, and not just that, but these servers and processing power that are being produced can comb through millions, billions, trillions of points of data, which we could never do. It's not something like, oh, maybe we could get enough people to push this through. It's just not happening. So I think that's one of the major portions. And then, as we're going to talk about a little later, I think finding correlates between data points, and again, not just 10 data points, we're talking in the millions. And again, as we're going to talk later, we're talking like quintillion here, numbers that we've never heard of before that AI will make possible.
Absolutely. It's definitely a powerful tool that we're just beginning to understand how to integrate and use effectively in this industry. But let's talk a little bit, before we get into the nuts and bolts of AI in the industry, let's talk a little bit about individualized medicine.
Sure.
Because that is one of the major drivers for us being interested in bringing these technologies in. So what does it mean to the patient and to the manufacturer to be able to produce these more personalized drug and device solutions?
That's a good question. I think that would take me back, I guess, sort of to my career then, how we started off. So I started in a pre-med track, pre-PT track, just biology. So that gives you all your basic knowledge, your AMP, your biology, your chemistry, your orgo, sort of the death wish for all undergrad students, that really those tough courses. But then you emerge more into the actual looking at the patients, which would be the doctorate. And it's funny, I'll never forget the director of our program. Her name was Shannon Clifford, fantastic woman and leader. And she would tell us about the importance of individualized medicine. It is so easy to find some playbook that when someone walks in, you just sort of prescribe whatever plan you have there in front of you, because they came in with a knee replacement. But from what I saw, even going through clinicals, you can have one person walk in with a knee replacement, and their pain is an 8 out of 10. And the next day, another person walks in with a 2 out of 10.
Right.
There's no way you can prescribe the exact same plan for both. It's just not going to happen. So that was sort of the birthing of this thought of individualized medicine. And then when we go into like pharmacokinetics, where we're talking how fast your body can react to a certain drug, obviously your weight, your size,
your metabolism, all kinds
exactly,
of things.
your metabolic makeup, the whole 9 yards is so individual to you as an individual, right? I mean, that seems so like individual, but those two things are very apparent. So, and even going back maybe more into this pharmaceutical side, the opioid epidemic. I mean, that was a huge thing several years ago. I mean, it's been silenced a little bit, but it's still very much out there. The thought of prescription should just be given because of, let's say, a pathology, or because someone walks in and presents this way. And that's not pointing fingers. Everyone's doing the best they can.
Right.
But, that thought of one size fits all, it just doesn't work. And it can't work. If we look at, heart disease and what they're prescribing for heart disease, a one size fits all mentality, it's a little scary. If you look at the efficacy, if you look at the effectiveness, and again, there's a lot of studies saying a lot of different things. So you shouldn't trust just one study, but there's definitely a lot of pointers that say individualized medicine is a mandate. Like, we need to start focusing on this. This can't be something in the background anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad as an industry that we are actually making good headway with that in a lot of areas. I mean, other areas, obviously. But when it comes to physical therapy, and when it comes to even some drugs, we have our compounding pharmacists who are able to customize things a little bit. But to your point, as we get more advanced and more integrated with AI, we're going to see that we're able to target individual needs even more closely, I think. And of course, we'll get to that. But I want to also mention one other technology that I talked about at the beginning, which is 3D printing, which is not a new technology in and of itself, right? We've known about 3D printers for the last decade or two anyway. Of course, they're becoming more commercial now, but with that being said, can you give us the big picture view of this technology today? And then talk a little bit about when you started to see it making its way into medical devices and pharmaceuticals. And when are 3D drugs, first developed, and you can talk about that for the benefit of our listeners, if you would.
Sure. So, I mean, it seems like you said, the commercialization of 3D printing. I was at a friend's house, let's say 3 or 4 months ago, and he walks up and shows me this little, trinket. And I was like, oh, that's cute. His kids are there.
Sure.
And he goes, like, yeah, we made it on a 3D printer downstairs. I was like, what? This is not something that is like, at the, oh my goodness, you need $10,000 to buy a 3D printer. No, I mean, we're talking like several $100s. But not only that, it really has been the rage. I mean, everyone's seen the LinkedIn videos of this huge 3D printer coming in and building a house in like Switzerland. I mean, everyone's seen that, but then as we go more specific to biologics, to biotech, orthopedics, it's a major breakthrough area. I mean, you can take scans of a femur and replicate the individual's femur. I mean, my anatomy, your anatomy is completely different.
Absolutely.
Even the way these bones, let's say, would produce bone mineral density, stress points, just because of, muscle insertions and angles. All of these things are exceptionally different. And now with 3D printing, you can replicate someone's piece of the body. As I was researching even for this, I saw mandibles. I mean, mandibles have foramen where you're having nerves run through and stuff like that, down to like the smallest microns we're building in 3D printing. So I think that's the excitement there. The second portion in biopharma, and we're going to get into that a little more in depth, is the thought of hyper-personalization of medicines. You and I talked about the danger when it comes to overprescribing, or even the one size fits all.
Right.
And I guess I got to go back now a little bit. So there's a huge number of testings that we can go in and take. Whether it's a complete blood count, a metabolic panel, looking at lipids. I mean, there's countless, right? Think of all those data points meshed into one. And now you take artificial intelligence, right? And you build this model where you can find direct correlates. I remember one thing that stuck out to me as I was going throughout my doctorate was grip strength is indicative of like 10 to 12 different areas. Overall strength, falls, malnutrition, depression, grip strength. Like, where did that come from? What are we even talking about right now? And yet it is a complete correlate to these other pathologies. Same concept here. What if you could take your red blood cell count, look at a metabolic panel, and again, these things aren't just specific. CBC isn't just one test, right? You're looking at white blood cells, you're looking at red blood cells, you're looking at different markers, biomarkers. What if you could take 2 to 3 data points and correlate them and immediately predict hypertension, right? What if you could take 4 data points and immediately predict some diabetic, what's the word? Inclination is not the right word, but what if we could look at 12 years out?
Predispositions, yeah.
There you go, boom.
Right.
You're good at this. Exactly, that predisposition. What if we could take those things and produce them at a huge, large level? What if we take patient records? And now we're going into HIPAA laws. So much of this is theoretical. But what if we could take the 340 million people in America, right? And what if we could take their patient records and allow AI to trend crawl? Again, this is all AI though. You and I can't do this. We can sit down and go through 15 patients a day. AI can do millions.
Right.
What if we even take that and make it even larger? If we take those things, grip strength's indicative of overall strength, it's indicative of heart disease. How many other things can we find using artificial intelligence? Now that goes back to the 3D printing, the original question. How much could we tailor a drug so specifically to someone's predisposition, right? We've got a geriatric population that, let's say, would be taking 6, 7, 8 drugs in a day. Their body needs extended release on certain, immediate release on others. And that's what this initial 3D printed drug did, Spritum. It's an epileptic drug. And what it does is it dissolves immediately. So again, that thought process of what can 3D printing do, it can hyper-personalize using, obviously, initially AI, and then moving on to that 3D printing of individual components. And
so
again,
Justin,
I know
thinking about those two technologies working together, AI and 3D printing, then are we talking about like hyper-specific dosage? Are we talking about delivery of like how we, once we take it, how it's dispersed in our bodies? Talk a little bit more about how you see those two technologies working together to truly make these different drugs than what we can compound today, for example.
I think the answer to the which ones is it's all of the above, to be honest. As I was looking through this, it's funny, I had not seen this article. And as I was looking back, someone published in 2019. And it's funny, as I read my paper and I looked at theirs, I was like, oh man, we were on the same track. So this isn't anything that's like vivaciously new, whoa, Justin, where'd you come up with this? No, this has obviously been something people have been thinking about.
It's a little bit of forward thinking, but I don't think it's out of the realm of consideration,
Not at all. And I think in 60 years, our world is going to be futuristic. If you and I walked the streets in 60 years, we'd be like, what is going on? And specifically for Biopharma and Biotech, because of how many advancements we're making. But with the hyper-personalization, dosage, yes. One thing they talk about when it comes to neurological diseases is the blood-brain barrier. We try to inhibit certain things from crossing the blood-brain barrier. If we're talking multiple sclerosis, if we're talking a whole bunch of neurological diseases. So what if we could take something that would have an extended release, but you wouldn't need to take 3 times a day. You could take it once and it just constantly feeds. And so it calms muscle activity or increases muscle activity. Same thing with dosages. Talk about how specific you could get a dosage. Again, that goes back to AI though. There's no way we're going to produce this on our own. This has to be seen through AI. So I think both of those areas, again, I'm not a neurologist. I'd love to sit with one and really talk to them about it and see what their take on it was, how specific we could make things. But yeah, I think all of the above. I think that opportunities are endless when it comes to what 3D printing could do.
Yeah, and not just for drugs, for devices too. I mean, that's, as you mentioned with, maybe recreating a femur or something like that, but even with medical devices, to your point about needing muscle stimulation or any other of the current treatments, it's only going to be made better by AI, and can, I would think, with using the 3D component, then gives you the ability to adjust size and, curvatures and different little nooks and crannies and things that are necessary for one person but may not be necessary for another. So it's very exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think the physiological implications are of something like this? For how do you see it? How do you see us ramping up to it? I guess.
Yeah. So I think the major problem here, and so obviously we talked, size, weight of a person, individual. We can use AI to find, complete blood counts, lipid panels, metabolic, whatever. I think we have to now go back to the production lines, right? These lines cost millions and millions of dollars to produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're validated. They produce an individual dosage size, dosage form, the whole 9 yards, right? You can't tell a company now to pull out of that and make one at a time. It's not feasible at this point, They have millions of dollars in these large lines. When they talk about big pharma is big pharma. It is. There's not like, oh, maybe that's just an overstatement. No, it's not. There's a lot of money in this. So the thought of immediately transitioning is exceptionally impractical. I think if you would talk to large biopharma companies, they'll say, yeah, our R&D team is on it 100%. But to say that there's a transition like right away, I don't think so. So again, I know we're talking more physiological implications, but I think that's the implication for our biopharma world, our life science industry as a whole.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to figure out how to scale it, right? Once we
100%.
perfect it, we have to figure out how to scale it. Yeah, I definitely know that will be a big concern to us across the industry. What do you think, besides the scalability, what are the major barriers, I guess, facing the utilization of 3D printing technologies? And let's just say in drug development at this point, what still needs to be done?
That's a good question. So, I mean, it's not wildness that there's only been one 3D printed drug approved. There's a reason for that. There's a reason there's not, 17 other companies that have already had FDA approval. This is really hard to do. Spritum, the first 3D printed drug, was sort of an anomaly in the way they built it. It was this powder form, and their talk was that they could suspend the individual drug in it so perfectly apportioned out. So that was sort of an individual drug that obviously got passed. To talk about it in a wider sense, whether we're talking heart disease or diabetes or, again, whatever it is, to have something validated at the level of like an individual, we can take 1 million pills and just take random samplings and figure out how well our lines are doing. How do you do that when your N equals 1? How do you do that when you have the individual and your system is building something different every time it starts? Concept is still the same. And I think it's funny, I was talking to the managing director of our firm about that. That's the question, I think. How do we do that? How do we get the FDA on board to say, sure, we're not producing the same exact thing twice, but you should still give us your approval? I mean, how do we even navigate those waters, and the honest truth is, I don't know.
That's interesting. I mean, I wonder how they did their clinical trials, right? Like, what kind of group do you put together when you're, when you're really trying to target everyone, but only one person at a time? I mean, that had to have been a huge challenge, which is probably why we haven't seen it replicated again and again at this point.
And, an interesting portion of that, I think that goes back to AI and predictive models. That's another wild implication of AI, that we can produce predictive models like we've never seen before. We can take several different components. AI can go through them, even if we're talking APIs or even dosage levels, right? And we can produce a predictive model with AI. And again, they're not going to be right every time, but they're going to be a lot better than you and me. I can tell you that much. We're going to get to the end and go, my goodness, this is fantastic. And so if we take those things in clinical studies and can produce predictive models, that might be something exciting. That might be something that can drive this, because instead of the old rigmarole you're going to be able to produce statistics that they would want to see almost immediately because of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, no, I think that it gets very exciting when you start to think about it in that way. And of course, that is one of the biggest benefits of AI is the analytics part of it, right? It can really just consume so much more data faster and produce results so that we can see where the correlations are, we can see where the anomalies are, and with much larger data sets. And I think that's the important piece of it. So Justin, while we're talking about all this huge potential for patient-specific treatments through AI and 3D printing and other methodologies and technologies that we have, but we also need to stop and consider the regulations. And you alluded to that a little bit with the Spritam drug. Our industry is based on regulations and that we need to adhere to or be compliant with. So at this early stage, have we heard from the FDA or other regulatory agencies on the expectations around these novel products?
It's a good question. Again, as I was doing this research, I came across a couple of things with they're labeling poly pills. So let's say there would be something that would have an immediate release followed by extended release of three more drugs, right? It hasn't been approved though. So I think a lot of this is theoretical now. It's in the R&D stage. I guess it's past theoretical. I'm sorry. It is in the R&D stage. They are showing direct models. I say this cautiously, but anything run by a larger body, where there's bureaucracy, where it's governmental run, is going to take longer. That's just the truth of it all, So, I mean, we look at anything starts small, and within 20 years, you're scaling up astronomically, exponentially to what you were doing originally. I would say in the next 20 years, the FDA is going to probably see this more and more, thus get more comfortable with it. The problem is, if you introduce something to me I've never seen, where do I start? What's my benchmark? Is Spritam the benchmark? Not really. It's a very specific drug to epileptic, an epileptic population. What are you going to do? Are you going to use it as your benchmark? You can't. It's not possible. Right. So I don't think they're comfortable yet. Obviously, there's only been one approved. But if we look at trends from the past, anything that's introduced early on, it takes 20, 25 years. And now you're not just rolling, you're exponentially rising with the concept. And I think this has such breakthrough capabilities. Again, as I was just thinking through it, think about like a city in the Midwest. Right. When we first graduated, we were told be a traveling doctor kind of thing. You make a lot more money, all these things. And why? Because you go to places in the middle of nowhere, let's say, where they need someone. That's possible. Again, what if you could, compound on this thought of telemedicine and AI and a 3D print? I mean, it sounds so futuristic. It sounds Star Trek-y. It's like you walk in, they have your CBC, they have your metabolic panel, they have all these different tests. You talk to a doctor, and in front of you, it spits out this individually made drug. I mean, that's like, what? But I mean, that's the implication in the long term, I believe. It sounds so theoretical at this point. But what if we could do that to a village that has no exposure even to the modern world? What if we did that to a Midwest town who doesn't have a doctor? What could we do? So I think the implications on in a larger sense are so exciting that it will gain traction. If it had a little upside, no one's going to give it a second thought. I think It has so much upside, so much hyper-personalized medicine, which is where we're going. I think people are going to start looking at it.
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, we've become so much better this last year at telemedicine. Mm-hmm. We've really had to up our game because people couldn't because of the COVID pandemic, they couldn't just necessarily, even if you have a doctor in your town, many places you just couldn't walk in, right? They wanted to rely on the telemedicine or the Skype visit. But I can see as you're talking how you could deliver individualized drug prescription medicines or even medical devices to someone who's half a globe away from you.
Yeah.
Right. You can have your appointment using technology, and then you can deliver the products that they need specifically, again, through technology.
And if there was ever a springboard, I mean, it's the last year. Goodness. I mean, as much as we're seeing the vaccine come and take, a forefront place, this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It doesn't seem like, there's going to be a lot of cautionary, procedure for the next, I hope it's not 5 years. I hope it's just in the next year or two. But I mean, goodness, if this is any kind of predictor, like, we got to know what we can do virtually. Can you imagine? I mean, if you'd have told me 2 years ago what was going to happen this last year, I would have laughed at you. There's no way,
I don't think anyone could have predicted it. Right.
Exactly. So I mean, it's that perfect springboard into something that has to utilize AI, to utilize this virtual environment, to utilize someone sitting home in their living room and being able to see these data sets and produce something. So it's the perfect springboard.
Yeah. Do you feel like this is a practical solution to the industry right now? Because I see, and the reason I ask that is I see so many organizations still struggling just to get digital. Like, I don't even, I mean, for lack of a better word, but some of them are not even using paperless systems yet, right? As an organization. And then to talk about AI and combining it with 3D technologies or other, predictive medicine technologies, it seems almost like it could be so far in the future for some of these organizations. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I think to a lot of our listeners, I'd love to see the demographic, because, I mean, look at SoCal, look at Boston. You have these small biotech companies coming out of nowhere and producing things that people are like, what? How did we get here, right? Think about like a Pfizer or a BMS or a Merck. They're a Titanic-sized vessel. You see the iceberg, you can turn that wheel. It can still take a while, right, to turn that ship. And so I don't think anyone's blind to the fact of what's going on. But I think, again, when you're talking about a 15,000, 20,000 person company, how do you turn it immediately? These agile 10, 15, 20 person teams are coming in and producing things that no one expected them to. And I think that's the excitement of all of this. Right. 25, 35 years ago, it didn't seem to be the reality. Nowadays, there's an LLC on every corner. You know what I mean? I mean, everyone is there, and we have brilliant minds, coming from every part of the globe, coming together as one and producing these things. So practicality for a large firm, probably not. They're going to be looking at it. They're going to have an R&D development team. There's just no question. But I think the sweet spot's going to be our small biotechs. I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see them producing stuff that no one expects. We're going to see those headlines when we turn on our Apple Spotlight, and it's going to be like, wait, they did what? You know what I mean? And I think that's what excites me.
Sure. And perhaps some of our larger organizations then are the vessel for, absolutely. Right? They're the vessel for scaling these technologies that have already been perfected by the smaller companies. And that's probably what we're going to see happen. I want to get your thoughts on, though, what does the future of 3D printed drug manufacturing look like for you? If you have a time frame, what's your best guess, and how do you see us getting there?
When I wrote a paper maybe 6 months ago, maybe longer, and the end of the paper just says, you're right, this is completely theoretical. Anyone reading it, anyone listening to this right now is in the back of their mind going, Justin, you're out of your mind. You're one of those nutcases that's coming out of left field talking about something that's not even possible. And I would agree to a certain extent. This is wild. To think of data points, to think of AI at such a large level, of combining, of getting, again, we talked about HIPAA. How in the world are you going to combine millions and millions and millions of patient records? So yes, in that way, it's a little wild. But again, I followed it up with, but if you think that this isn't going to happen in the future, like, you're out of your mind as well. Right now it's theoretical, but 1910 to 2021, 1921 to 2021, we're in a different galaxy at this point. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you couldn't have 100%. Convinced someone in 1920 that where we were going to be today. And I think in the same way, this tech boom, these small companies, there are no caps anymore. I mean, the sky is the limit. Go for it. So yes, tomorrow, not going to happen. 50, 60 years down the line, I wouldn't be surprised even close.
Yeah, and we are seeing it happen outside of, obviously not in pharma, nothing that's regulated by HIPAA and industries like that. But outside of that, we see the AI capabilities of now you look something up on your computer and all of a sudden it's showing up on every one of your devices and on your, so we know that the technology is out there to not only gather data points, but quickly analyze them and then deliver back something that's customized or personalized just for you. And so our challenge as an industry then is going to be taking that technology that does exist in many different forms and integrating it into what we're doing every day.
And I think that's maybe where you introduce like these CMOs and these individualized R&D clinics, right? Where you have 10 to 15 brilliant minds come together to produce a prototype, to produce a thought process, talk with the FDA about it. And then you have these large level CMOs, or even like you said, a Pfizer, a large biopharma firm who says, wow, we see the vision. You don't have the money or the scalability potential to do anything, but we'll take it on for you. So just like you said, I wonder if the model we'll start seeing, I think we're already seeing it, is these small teams, brilliant minds, concerted effort to one specific area,
right?
And then handing it off to these large biopharma firms. I think that's 100% on.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Justin, this has been such a fun conversation just to think about the possibilities and know that even though sometimes it's, our conversation may have sounded like, yeah, we're so far off from that as an industry. I don't feel like we're far off from that technology wise. So now it's just doing the work of integrating and that's fun. It's fun to think about. And I guess we'll see how it does play out over the coming years, throughout the pharma and biotech industries, but it's fun to have these conversations. So I want to just in closing, see if there's any additional thoughts or specific takeaways that you wanted to leave our listeners with today.
I guess springboarding off that last comment, just as the closing thought is, certain parts of this, like the 3D printing portion of it, definitely near future. Combining everything with AI, maybe a little longer out. But like you said, all these things are in development now. Yeah, we will see something. And I think it's exciting. I think the individualized portion of it's exciting. I think that people are really looking for the betterment of our patient populations. And patient populations, me and you know what I mean? That's everybody, goodness. I think that's an exciting thing. I think this hyper-personalization, individualized medicine, I would encourage readers. You don't get a lot of exposure to individualized medicine unless you're actually in the medical world. Take a look at it if you get a chance. It's an exciting thought. And I really appreciate, again, you taking the time. This was exciting and I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin, for being our guest today. We really appreciate your insight and expertise on this topic. And also, I want to give a shout out to our producer, Ben Kitchen. Lastly, I'm sending out my appreciation to you, our valued listeners. I am grateful for your time each week and for your help in sharing this podcast. Because of you, we've grown tremendously this last year. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to subscribe in your podcast player of choice and be sure to share it with your friends, colleagues, and online networks so they can enjoy it too. Please send us a quick note or leave an online review. We'd love to include your feedback within our networks. For show notes and additional podcast resources, please visit www.ivtnetwork.com. We'll be back again next week with another innovative and insightful discussion. Until then, make it a great week.